Hi, this is Renee, and you're listening to the Looks Creepy Cool podcast. I am here with our wonderful creepy cool guest, Danielle DeVor. Danielle, how are you?
I'm doing great, and it's wonderful to be here, Renee.
Awesome. Thank you for this creepy cool night. It stopped raining where I am, but there's still eeriness, particularly after reading your book. So I can't wait to dive in for that.
Well, we have lots of rain here, so it's looking very
Mhm.
creepy and spooky and cloudy out there. So,
Oh, love it, love it.
so I'm Danielle DeVor. I'm the author of the series The Marker Chronicles, as well as a few other books called Ma and Horses. I tend to write possession and exorcism horror with a little bit of a witchy bent, and I really just have always been a horror fanatic. You can find my books on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, pretty much all the major retailers.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Danielle, it's a pleasure to have you. And for my listeners, Danielle DeVor, she is an extraordinary horror author. She's the author of the Marker Chronicles and named one of the Examiner's 2014 Women in Horror, 93 horror authors you need to read right now for her novel Sorrow's Point, and named Science Fiction Author of the Year 2015 by authorclassifieds.com. Danielle has been spinning the spider webs, guys, or rather keyboard, for more frights and oddities. And the frightening book that we are going to discuss today with Danielle is Sorrow's Point, the first book in the Marker Chronicles series. So I want to give a warm, creepy, cool welcome to Danielle. Hi, Danielle. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Thank you again for being on the podcast. Just super excited. Before we dive in, I am like a horror buff, and I will say, reading your book, I was creeped out, hauntingly creeped out. The first couple of the chapters, I got to know that there's a little girl named Lucy who is possessed, and she killed a cat. So
Yeah.
that really set everything off. So I just want to know what possessed you to write an exorcism novel.
Well, it actually began as a conversation with my cousin. He is 1 year younger than me, and he is also a confirmed horror film fanatic. So at the time, back when I originally wrote Sorrow's Point was about 2012,
Mhm.
and my cousin and I were lamenting about the lack of good horror films in the theaters at the time. And I told my cousin, it really drives me crazy because it's not that hard to come up with a good premise. You can have this big, creepy old house, and okay, so you need a reason why the house is creepy. Well, okay, you can have this rich old man who is completely evil and he does something horrible. Say he kills his wife and his daughter, and you have a police officer come up to the house because newspapers are stacking up or whatever, and there's something wrong, just to check out the house, and he spies through the kitchen window, hears this man chewing on his child's leg, and my cousin was just like, oh my god, that would be the great beginning of a book or a movie or something. I'm like, well, heck, I'll write it. And originally I was writing it from the point of view of the father, and it just was not working at all. And I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to copy The Exorcist or anything like that. So then it hit me as like, well, what if it's from the point of view of the priest? And what if he's not actually a priest anymore? And that's when Jimmy started rolling in my head, and then I knew who he was.
Right. That's so the exorcism part. Like, did you do any research? And because when I was
Oh,
reading the
yes.
book, it was very like, it reminded me, obviously, the Exorcist movie,
Hmm.
but also, like exorcism is real. In case anyone
Yes.
doesn't know, like, I remember watching the movie Possession. I don't know if you remember, I forget who's involved, but it's basically based off of like the Dybbuk box.
Hmm.
And I saw it on Paranormal Witness years ago on the Sci-Fi Channel. There was a show called Paranormal Witness. So I'm just curious, like, did you have any research in
I
exorcism?
went
Any?
hardcore into research. I actually tracked down
Wow.
the priest who was the consultant on The Exorcist, did actually write a book about exorcism and possession that was mostly only known by the Catholic Church. And I tracked down that book. I read that book, tracked down every other book I could find that was a nonfiction book about possession. And, so I went through the stuff that happened with Annalise Michel and all these different, like, known major, familiar, and I won't say popular, but well known exorcism cases. And what I found out that I found most interesting was the fact that every single major world religion has an exorcism rite. And so, like with in the section of like Jewish mysticism in the Kabbalah, there's an exorcism rite. There's a certain type of exorcism rite in the Muslim faith. There's a type of exorcism rite in Hindu religion. I just found that absolutely fascinating because, for us as, Americans, and we hear all about the Catholic rites of exorcism,
Right,
but
right.
there's actually other types of exorcism besides just the Christian exorcism rite. And I found that very fascinating, which helped in my head because then it was like, okay, how can I make this different? And that's when I pulled in a little bit of the witchcraft and Wicca because Jimmy, of course, is very well, I won't say he is extremely schooled in witchcraft and Wicca, but his girlfriend is a witch. And so
Tabby.
he knows what happens during her rituals and everything and knows that they are not evil. And so for him, it makes sense to incorporate some of that stuff into what he knows now versus what he just knew when he was a priest.
Right. And I love Tabby. I love her. I was like, especially with like the plants, and she was curious like why are they all dying? I'm like, she just had this mystique about her,
Hmm.
which was a great like partner for Jimmy. But in terms of the exorcism, like I am just freaked out by exorcism, exorcists. So when you were doing your research, was there a particular like story that you came across that freaked you out, or that was like inspiration even more so for the book?
I'm not sure necessarily there was a
Mm-hmm.
story per se, but I will say that I'm from a family of so-called sensitives, and
Okay.
our entire family has lived in different haunted houses over the years.
Wow.
And
That is
so,
awesome.
knowing what
Mhm.
shadow people look like and things like that, because I've personally seen them. In fact, the house that we're living in now, this office is haunted. You can watch shadows moving in and out of the doorway at night.
Wow.
So it was things like that that I kind of incorporated as like my personal knowledge of paranormal and things that happened, as well as things I've read about. And I think that that kind of helped up the ante a little bit, having it based in reality versus just something that someone is imagining, if that makes any
Right.
sense.
Yeah, no, I'm so Danielle. Okay. So you're not scared at all. Like, do you have any like cuz I watched the Dead Files, and
Hmm.
Amy talks about like protection and sage and all that, or like obviously getting in like other people to like help cleanse the house. So like do you have any like protection that you use to like ward you off of
Well,
any
I
spirits?
have studied witchcraft and the occult since I was very young. I
Okay.
was the kid that, dove into vampires when they were like 3 years old. So I've been studying all
Mhm.
these things for many years. And when it's a spirit that is not threatening, I don't worry about it. But if it's something that comes in and it has a like a dark, dank feel, then I'm like, okay, we're not going down this road. I actually had an experience once where I was working for a home health agency, and this home health agency actually had a client that was in a nursing home, but she was well enough to where she didn't need like a hospital bed and that type of thing. So she had kind of like a mini apartment. And my job was basically to go pick her up from the dining room, help her get back to her apartment, chat with her and stay with her for a few hours until she wanted to go to bed, get her ready for bed, and then I was done for the evening. Well, this one specific evening, I was like, doing everything with her normally, and she was not sitting with the group of ladies that she normally sat with. She was sitting with a new lady, and she had this very odd necklace. And she held it out to my client. She's like, "Would you like to touch my necklace?" And I had this weird feeling about it. And my client was like, "Oh, yeah, I'll look at it." And she touched it. And then she pulled her hand back and she wanted to go back to her room immediately. The
My
necklace
God.
was a Thor's hammer. But what was weird about it was that it had these kind of like ruby eyes on the wolf. And it just, for some reason, it gave me this weird feeling. And so I took my client back to her room, and we started out, she used to watch like old musicals and stuff, so we put on one of her favorite old musicals and we sat there and watched it. And then she's like, I'm not feeling really good, I'm in pain. And I'm like, Well, that's odd because she usually didn't complain of pain. And I
Mm.
asked her, what was going on. And she said, my back really hurts. And so I called the nurse, and the nurse said, well, she's due for medication about 9 o'clock. So I'll just make sure she gets her pain medicine then and stuff. So, well, I get her ready for bed because she decides she wants to go to bed early. And she's laying in bed, and the nurse comes and gives her medication and leaves. And I'm just sitting there because my client suddenly starts like moaning, like just this horrible kind of like keening sound. And I'm like, are you okay? And she's like, no, I'm not okay. And this is after she's had her medication. And I'm kind of at this like thing not to know what to do. So I call the nurse again, and she's like, well, I
Right.
can't really do anything until I call the doctor. So just hold out, whatever. Well, above my client's bed, she had this really pretty ballet painting. It was like a scene from Swan Lake, like the forest things and like the ballerinas and everything. Well, I can from the chair I sat in her living room area, I can look in and see her in her bed because I want to watch over her and make sure she's okay. Well, as I'm sitting there, the painting turns black.
What?
Yeah, and like I mean literally you can like look at a regular painting and then suddenly the whole like inside of the frame of the painting goes black, and I'm like, what in the heck is this? And like suddenly gradually the blackness started extending out from the frame, and I
Oh my
said,
God.
you have not been invited, you are not welcome here, get back from where you came from. The blackness disappeared, my client stopped crying and went to sleep.
Oh my God. Thank God for you. So, like, what happened to the lady that let her touch the necklace?
Never saw her again.
What?
Yeah, was the
Wait a
weirdest thing.
minute. But didn't she live there too? Like,
Yeah, supposedly she was there. I mean, they just said that she was new. And then I asked
oh,
the next time, because, I never saw her, because, it wouldn't be all that unusual to not see somebody at the dining hall like
right,
every time or something. But it was like
right.
a few, days later. And, I asked just wondering where this lady was, because I said, a few days ago, my client sat with this lady and I haven't seen her. Is she okay? And they
Right.
said, what do you mean? Your clients always sat with this group of ladies. And I'm like, what?
Oh my God. So, was that really someone? Maybe that was a spirit.
Yeah. So that's like one of my
Oh.
my big personal experiences of things happening that's just a tad weird.
Wow. So like that brings me to because on looks creepy cool. I've always asked my guests what was the creepiest thing that's happened to you and what was the coolest thing that's happened to you. And that sounds like to be the most creepiest thing that's happened
That's
to
the
you.
creepiest thing that I've ever had happen.
Wow. But thank God for you and that like you're
Yeah, and
experienced
I'm
in
glad
this.
the lady was okay and everything. And then
Yeah.
not long after, I got another job, so I didn't work
Mhm.
with her anymore. But it was just a really weird experience.
Wow. That so okay, so while we're on it, and then I'll get back to the book because I have tons of questions about the book. But like, so what was the coolest thing that's happened to you in your life thus far?
Oh my. That's really a hard question. I would
Hmm.
say one of the most fun things I've ever had happen was in the earlier days of Facebook, they used to, like, different companies would run giveaways and different things.
Yes, I remember.
And
Yep.
so I had seen this thing for my dad and I used to watch UFC all the time.
Hmm.
And Bud Light was doing this Battle of the Bayou thing. It was like this thing where you could win, like, memorabilia or whatever. The
Hmm.
grand prize was a trip down to New Orleans to go see a fight. I'm like, okay, so every day I would just enter the giveaway, as you do.
Right.
I won.
What?
So I was able to get me and my dad to go down to New Orleans because they paid for our hotel, plane ticket, and the fight.
Wow.
And we got to meet like numerous fighters and everything, got to have gloves signed and all types of things. So that's probably about the coolest thing I've ever had happen.
Wow. That is really cool because I've never heard of that being done ever
Yeah, and
again.
they haven't done it since. I can't imagine how much it cost to do that because it wasn't
Yeah.
just me and my dad that won. They had hundreds of people there.
Oh, they had a big budget, Danielle. A
Yeah,
very
big
big,
time.
a very big budget. But speaking of big, I mean the biggest like character to me, even though you did a great way of transitioning from Blackmore to like the present with Jimmy,
Hmm.
Will, Lucy, Tabby, and Will's wife.
Hmm.
And I just love like I love it was so creepy. Like how you describe the Blackmore family and like what happened. Like that to me was like the biggest part in the book as I gradually read the book because I was just like literally I read a chapter and I was like this is freaking creepy. Like this is like how did you come up with Blackmore and like also like just like the story behind it because it's very eerie. Guys, like that part about knowing about Blackmore is very eerie. So how did you come up with that?
Well, the inspiration for Blackmore
Mhm.
is kind of a combination between the Marston's house in Stephen King's Salem's Lot
Oh,
and the mansion that was in Flowers
mhm.
the Attic.
Oh
So
yes.
when you combine those two houses together, you have this
Mhm.
grand old mansion that's in wonderful condition, but it
Right,
has this
right.
horrifically evil past. That's kind of where the inspiration for Blackmore came from. The situation between Mr. Black and his wife
Mhm.
just basically came out of my imagination. It was not really based on
Wow.
anything.
Wow. That I mean, that came out of your imagination.
Hmm.
Like, what other creepy things are you thinking about?
Oh goodness. One of my I get a lot of like ideas from different dreams I have, and one of my
Oh.
future projects is a unique type of vampire novel because it was a dream I had, and where it's not like actually a physical vampire,
Okay.
but these people end up going to stay at this like really fancy house, and you only certain people get invited there for like one day every year for a specific time, but there's specific rules you have to follow. You cannot go outside after a certain time. When dusk starts to fall, you have to go inside. You cannot go outside. And what it is that the plant life and the grounds actually feed on the blood of people to
Oh
keep
my
it lush and
God.
wonderful, kind of like a la burnt offerings from the 70s, but in
Oh my
a
God.
more intense way because the vines and stuff decide they really like this family that comes to the house to visit, and they break in and try to get at the family and everything to try to eat them. So that's kind of like one of my future projects I'm playing with. That was a dream I had. So,
Oh my gosh. Well, Danielle, you already broadcast your idea, so you have to get started on that book. Like
yes.
right now. Like right now. So do you find any look, for me, I know when I watch horror movies, it's like when I'm stressed out, I'll watch a horror movie and
Hmm.
everything will be okay. Is writing like horror books your therapeutic way of just like de-stressing or
Not
no?
really. I'm
Mhm.
much like you, and watching horror films is kind of like
Mhm.
my comfort things. I have certain comfort movies, like one of them
Yeah.
is The Shining with
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson. I can watch that over and over again.
Yeah.
Another one is World War Z.
Okay, with
Just
Brad.
these
Yeah.
familiar movies that are familiar to me that, well, for
Mhm.
whatever reason, they just kind of make me feel comfortable and relaxed, and there's not really a whole lot like that triggers my brain into like thinking about a whole lot. So that's kind of like my relaxation when I think
Yeah.
of a book idea. It's not so much therapeutic, though. I will say that there have been characters in my life that I've based on somebody horrible I knew way back when, but there's no like features that you could tell by them. But like, a
Yeah.
lot of authors will say, they like to kill their enemies in their books, so I've done that. That's kind of fun.
Oh my God,
But the
did they
funniest one was
yeah.
the very first book I ever wrote was this vampire novel. It was a young adult vampire novel.
Mhm.
And so the idea was this street kid uh, who dies on the street but gets turned into a vampire, only to discover that he's the reincarnation of a long lost vampire king.
Oh.
And I needed a reason for the character Matthias to end up on the
Mhm.
street, because I had it set up to where he was with a normal family and whatever, and he had a mom and dad. He's an only child, and so I had his parents killed in a car accident. And his
Oh.
parents were based specifically on my parents, and I gave the same names because it was my parents. They didn't care. But my dad always laughs. She's like, "Yeah, her first book, she kills me."
That's so so funny. One thing I want to talk to you about is just horror in general.
Hmm.
So years past, horror was just like a seasonal thing. Oh, October, and then you have like January, February when like like the horror movies come out, and then
Mm-hmm.
like it gears up maybe towards end of summer. But now like horror is really like mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see, and as a woman horror author, do you see like more women horror authors being more prominent in the industry or getting more recognized, or
I
how is your
have.
experience? Yeah.
I would say back when I started publishing books in 2012, there was even advice to use a pen name that would
Mm,
not indicate that you were a woman so that you could actually sell your books. I rejected that because I'm who I am and I want to be known for what I write.
right.
So, I did it anyway. But I was actually counseled, like, well, you could just get by with doing D DeVor, DL DeVor or something and not, like, give out your full real name so that people wouldn't know you're female. And I'm like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. That's ridiculous. If somebody's
Right.
going to decide not to read a book just because of the gender of the author, no way.
Yeah.
I don't care. So I, started from the get go, but I will say that, especially the last 2 years, I've seen more female authors getting recognition online, especially like there's a great horror group on Facebook called Books of Horror,
Hmm.
and a lot of people are in there all the time, and I see many more female authors' books being mentioned now than before I even discovered Books of Horror. You'd once in a while you'd hear about like Anne Rice or someone like
Right.
that, but you wouldn't really hear about anyone else, and you'd have to
Right.
stumble across female authors like browsing through the bookstore. And
Right.
now it's much more, I think, prevalent that people are talking about all these different voices of horror, and I think it's wonderful.
Oh, yeah, I know. And I've noticed that too. Like it's changed over the years, which is phenomenal because women in horror kick ass, and it's not just a man's world
Absolutely.
too. Like even we kick even more ass because like we're just like badasses in themselves. So
Exactly.
I think
100%.
it's yes, 100%. And then so with that being said, are there any women horror authors that you're currently reading now or that you hang out with, or is anyone in particular?
I don't really hang out with people per se. Like, I
Hmm.
know I have a big network of horror authors online.
Yeah.
One horror author that I've had a lot of really good conversations with
Hmm.
writes extreme horror. I don't know if you've ever read any of Judith Sonnet's books,
No.
but she
Judith
writes
Sonnet.
some really intense extreme horror, but she's super nice.
Hmm.
Um and then, like, I just find other horror authors in general, but Judith is the one that comes to mind the most.
Hmm.
um there's a couple other ladies that are in books of horror. V Castro is
Yes,
really
D.
good.
Castro. Yeah.
um and then let's see who else. Trying to think who else have I read lately, because I've been going on a reading binge and I've been reading a whole bunch of books.
Oh, that's awesome. Isn't that like the best? Like you
It
just get
is.
lost in a book and you just go one after the other. Like even like reading Sorrow's Point, I was just like next chapter, next chapter, next chapter. Okay. Jimmy's upstairs with Lucy and he's drags her out and her and Will take her to the attic, or is it her and Tabby? Him and Tabby take him to the attic, take her to the attic, and I mean it's just page after page after page. It's just like riveting, like your writing. It just really has the reader, including myself, like engaged from the beginning to the end. Like I finished the book in a day. Like
Oh my goodness.
it was just like amazing. So are there any particular scenes that was one the most disturbing to write, and then the other one that was the most I would say refreshing to write?
I won't necessarily say disturbing,
Mm-hmm.
because my eventual goal is to write something that scares myself. I haven't done it
Mm-hmm.
yet, but that's
Oh,
one of my
good.
goals as an author. I want to scare myself.
Oh.
So I haven't done that yet, but I would say the very end of the book, which this would be a spoiler, when the exorcism is occurring and what happens to Lucy when she has, the
Yeah.
shard of glass and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably the most difficult scene in the book to write. Refreshing, another funny story. So
Okay.
this actually happened to my parents. The scene where Jimmy finds out that he's a marker when he is in the
Yep.
the car. My parents were in San Francisco with some family friends of ours just on a trip to San Francisco, and they had stayed at a hotel, and they were going to like Ghirardelli factory the next day and everything. Well, when they came down morning to go to the car, somebody had defecated right in front of the car, like
Oh,
a steaming
what?
pile. And so my dad went back into the hotel to let the guy in the desk know, like, somebody had, taken a dump in the car, like, not on the car, but in front of it.
Yeah.
And the guy who was the front desk agent, now this is the funny part, it wasn't from California, he was of Indian descent. And he was like, "What do you mean take a dump?" He didn't understand it. My dad was a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, so he doesn't
Oh,
come out
wow.
with, like easy language and stuff. And he's like, "Well, this guy evidently took a shit in front of the car. I just want to let you know."
Oh my
And the
God.
front desk clerk was like, "Why would he do such a thing?" And my dad's like, "I have no idea. This isn't my city. I don't know."
Oh my God. That's so funny.
So I had to put that in the book somewhere
Okay.
because it was so outlandish, but it actually happened. And so I was
Wow.
like, well, this is kind of a funny way, but it would be an interesting segue into Jimmy finding out what he is.
Wow. Oh my gosh. You have like I feel like speaking with you, you have so many like experience in your life that you just like that's not from the average person and that you
Yeah,
take it and like put it in your books. Like that's the key. It's not the average person wouldn't experience some of the things that you've experienced, but it's
there are so
cool.
many things, like the things that happen to me and
Mhm.
my father. We also have this random thing where we'll be doing something completely normal and we'll meet somebody famous just out of the blue.
Wow.
It's like all these like weird things. I don't know if it's like an energy in the air or whatever, but like there are so many stories behind things that have happened to my dad, things that have happened to me, and it's almost like things are drawn to us. It's just really funny.
Wow. Wow. It's energy. It's
Yeah.
energy. I totally believe in energy and like the universe and like,
Mm-hmm.
bringing that energy to you. So I want to take this part and just like transport you into your book. Okay.
Okay.
You get to go and live in Blackmore. All right.
Okay.
And you already know the history about it, but it's the only place that you can live. Who would you bring with you? Not any of your characters, dead or alive. Think of two characters that you would bring with you to help you survive Blackmore and get rid of the curse.
Well,
Dead or alive, anyone.
okay. One of them, which will be an amusing thing for people that have seen the movie, one would be Slim Whitman. Because in Mars Attacks, the way his music like made the aliens' heads explode, my
Yeah.
thought would be if anything else, have Slim Whitman sing, and then it might drive some of the ghosts crazy, and they might go away for a while.
Okay. Oh my
That
god.
would be
Oh my
one.
god. Mm.
The other, this might be cheating a little bit. Tabby's actually based on my best friend, so I would want
Oh.
to bring my best friend along, but ironically, she's the character in the book, so
Wow. No,
that might
I
be
mean,
cheating a little bit.
no, but it's inspiration. So yeah,
Yeah.
I give you a pass on that. That is
Okay.
fascinating. That is fascinating. Okay. All right, awesome. Oh, what was the most valuable advice anyone gave to you as a writer, particularly as a woman horror author?
I'm not so sure necessarily as a woman horror author, but
Hmm.
as an author in general, I was told by someone the best way to write a book when you're getting into it is to think about how, as an author, you have to give the reader clues and descriptions so they can visualize it in their head. So you kind of have to write your story like you're watching a movie. So you have to
Yeah.
know what the people are wearing. You have to know what the setting looks like. You have to know what the weather is. You have to know whether the character's hot or cold, whether the food they're eating, whether it tastes good or if it's horrible. All these different things, because that, on screen we see that in terms of like facial expression, or somebody will grab their shoulder or something if they're cold, things like that. So I try to incorporate that in my writing to flesh everything out and really try and make it seem like you're almost doing a visual experience versus just reading a book.
Awesome. No, I mean, you did a great job too, because it really did read like a movie or like a riveting television series. So that brings me to my other question. Who would play Jimmy, Tabby, Will, and anyone else in your book?
Um, Jimmy, I think Keanu Reeves would be great.
Oh, of course. Keanu can play anyone. He's like
He
the best.
can, but he's also a really
Yeah.
nice guy. But he
Right.
can also kick butt. So, all those
Right.
things Jimmy needs. And
Right.
he's also a little bit self-deprecating. And I think,
Mm.
that whole thing mixes well together. Tabby, Mariska Hargitay, I think would be a really good person.
Oh, okay.
Um, and of course, like, you'd have to kind of age the people around it. So, but, just
Right.
ideas. Tor, I think would be, have, like, if, the time period, Lauren Hutton would be great for Tor.
Oh, yes. Yes. Wow.
And Will's probably, because he's kind of like an everyman. So, like, maybe somebody
Hmm.
like Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, I see that. Or Jake
Yeah,
Gyllenhaal.
yeah,
Or
he'd
Jake
be good at
Gyllenhaal.
it too.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, awesome. Danielle, it's been a pleasure speaking with you about your book and about like your creepy cool experiences. How can anyone pick up a copy of your book and any other thing that you want to mention? This is the time to.
Well, I have a website which
Mhm.
Renee will put in the information, and my books are available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, pretty much anywhere that books are sold.
Mhm.
And I also, in case anyone is interested, I happen to do some unusual crochet art, which is basically converting posters into Afghans. And once in a while,
Wow.
I'll accept a commission for one of those.
Wow. And how can people get in contact with you if they want one?
Oh, I'm on, all the social media things. So
Mhm.
Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all the majors.
Awesome. Awesome. Danielle, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for speaking with me tonight. And have a great rest of your evening. And I can't wait to have you next in a couple of weeks or months or whatever. Whenever you want to come on the show and talk about your other books, I'm more than happy
I
to.
would totally be ecstatic to come on anytime you'll have me.
Oh, thanks, Danielle. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.